I'm going to be chatting to you all about interviews and specifically myth busting some of the common perspectives or thoughts people have about data science interviews and generally software interviews. So let me just start first with a bit about myself, so you know where I'm coming from, because this is obviously going to be from my perspective, and you know, like other people on the call are software engineers or more mature data science operations. I come from a background of working for mostly Silicon Valley startups at this point, where the teams, especially the data teams, are on the smaller side, maybe like 5 to 10 people. But backing up from there, I got my undergraduate degree in computer science from the University of Virginia. At the time, I also double majored in systems engineering and was really looking for data science before it was a thing. I graduated in 2013. So yeah, it was just at the start of when data science was starting to take off as a term. And once I graduated, I learned Berkeley had this amazing master's program in data science, so people can check that out if they're interested. I loved the experience. They taught a lot of the content that we're going over now, but you know, like obviously it's a master's program, so in a little bit more depth than a one-day workshop. But it was a really great experience and got me to a place where I could get my foot in the door in a data science industry. Yeah, so from there, I have worked in startups in Boston, in Kampala, Uganda. I worked for a solar company building kits that got people off of kerosene and candles and onto solar, making payments via mobile money on their phone. That was a really cool company. And now I work at Carta, which is the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Whereas before in Uganda, people are making 10-cent payments a day. Now we're working with like billion-dollar acquisitions and big transactions. So that's just a little bit about me, and keep that as context as we talk through some of these interview myths. So the first one I wanted to talk about is that people think that they're the one being interviewed. That's not true, but this is way more of a two-way street than what people often recognize. And I know when I really want a job, sometimes I can get a bit nervous and think like I'm in the spotlight, people are grilling me. And actually this is also an opportunity for you to ask the team a bunch of questions, understand what positions they're actually offering. You know, a job description is one thing, but what your day-to-day is going to be looks often very different than that. You can talk to the team, you know, about how they operate on the day-to-day, what's valuable as a deliverable in the context of their organization, and things like that. Another thing to keep in mind is that it's really, really hard to hire for these positions. It's hard to interview as well, but the companies that are looking for the best of the best and great data scientists are going through so many applications. They're recruiting really heavily. They're trying to get diverse pipelines, meaning diverse backgrounds, diverse skill sets. Also, of course, like pushing for diversity and inclusion should be a focus. So there's a lot that they're trying to take into account. And you, as the person being interviewed, when you have the chops to keep up in that environment, have a lot of power and should recognize that you have that power when you're sitting in that chair. So I want to talk about a bit, when you are sitting in front of the interview panel, what you should be thinking about and evaluating from your side of the table. The first thing is, who is this team? Like, who's on the team? What kind of problems are they solving? Something that I'd ask about is, there are a lot of companies that do reactive data science, and then there are companies that do proactive data science. So is this a team that's only taking requests from around the company and doing analytics and dashboards and stuff like that? Or is this a team that's like building product and you have to be kind of your own product manager and going out and getting momentum from teams to help implement your vision? That really changes what your day-to-day and expected workload is going to look like. So moving on to type of work, then there's also been some discussion in the chat already about, you know, things like adjusting the details of a machine learning model, like the actual implementation of an algorithm. That's very, very different than doing dashboards for some business intelligence needed on the team. And again, understanding like, is this kind of a PhD type role? Do I need to know the details of how statistics work and be able to optimize based on my intuition of that knowledge? Or is this something where it's about moving fast and getting things on the table, regardless of if they're perfect or not? So the next thing I'd talk about with your potential future employer is the culture of the company, and also the potential for growth within it. So you don't want to join, or you could join an organization where you're not completely aligned with how they think about building a team or the mission of the company, but usually that doesn't lead to a lot of job satisfaction. So you should be talking to them a bit about how they, what their mission is, how they think about building the strongest team possible. The question of growth is not only how quickly is the company growing, because if you join an early startup where they're planning to become the next tech unicorn, like that's something you should be aware is a part of the vision. It's not only a potential for like wealth creation, but it says a lot about how many hours you're going to be working a week if you're going to succeed in that role. The other thing is that from the perspective of your career, like you need to know how you're trying to grow as an employee, what skills you want to develop, and make sure that the role that you take is developing your skills in a way that that builds your resume so that you can continue to have that job satisfaction that you're looking for. Okay, so the next one is that a lot of people think when they apply to a job that their interviewers are unbiased judges of skill. And I just want to talk a bit about what that actually looks like from the interviewer's perspective. So you think like, I'm providing you a resume, I'm sitting in front of you talking about my skill set and I'm answering all your questions correctly. And actually like the interviewer ideally could just evaluate you in that context, but they're interviewing, they probably reviewed hundreds of resumes. They might have talked to 10 or more candidates already. So you do yourself a favor by trying to differentiate yourself from the crowd. And it's actually not that hard to differentiate yourself. So if we talk a bit about how you can stand out, a lot of it is just about bringing your full self to the table. So when you talk to a team, you're kind of selling your experience and skill set, and you have to think about what are the problems this team is trying to solve, and can I solve those problems? If I can, sell that. Like they want to hear from somebody who can come in and take control of the situation and deliver value. So that's one way you can definitely stand out. There are other ways that are much more simple. Just like if you're confused about something, Micheline mentioned this, ask clarifying questions. Don't just like bumble off and talk about something that pops to mind but doesn't actually get to the point. Make sure you're very clear on what problem you're trying to solve. That's actually a big signal to the interviewer that there's like a level of seniority in how you're approaching the problem. Related to that is just responding to questions with composure. Some people, when they get flustered, they rattle off answers and it's clear they don't quite have a structured way of thinking about the problem. If you can respond with composure, it again is a good signal. And then these last two points are, again, just about being genuinely interested in the position. So many people, they're applying to 10 different companies, and because of that, they don't really research the job in advance, or that they're not really invested in what the team's doing. And that's very obvious to the interviewer, and it has this effect of, they're trying to pay attention, but it doesn't feel as human or as engaging as it could if you had just put in the time to research the team and the industry and ask the right questions. Okay, so this is another myth that technical skills are the most important thing in these interviews. And it's another one that's not true. Like, of course, you need to be able to perform technically, because these roles are very technical. If you come in and a certain skill set is needed and you haven't learned that yet, that's something both you and the team need to know up front. But the part that gets neglected is that skills get you in the door, but I'd say things like your ability to communicate, your business acumen, and your vision for the company and the role say a lot about your level. So if you're trying to come in at a higher level, that needs to be very clear. And I want to paint the picture here a bit for y'all. So let's just imagine that you go to a data science interview and they ask you to discuss how you would evaluate the performance of an XGBoost model, which that's totally fair game for any data science interview. So the answer that we would get from most applicants would be to talk about precision, recall, the F1 score, which if a candidate can actually explain intuitively what an F1 score is and why that's a good choice rather than just precision and recall, that's like a good signal to send to. Again, these are good answers. Also, if the candidate goes through a confusion matrix and talks about, how the cases are splitting over those true positive, false positive groups, that's another good signal. But what stands out as a really great answer is it can take a bunch of different forms, and I want to really send that message home of you don't have to fit one profile. It's about knowing who you are and what you're bringing to the table and really selling that. So let me just go through these 3 different candidate profiles that I've seen and that were great answers. So the first one is what I'd call the experienced practitioner, where they understand what you're talking about evaluating an XGBoost model, and they can take that question and go into a level of detail about that specific model. So here I have pictured like SHAP values. If you've worked with XGBoost before and you've struggled with some of the challenges in using them, you might know some methods like using SHAP for feature importance that get you past some of those hurdles. And then that candidate can discuss at a deeper level with the interviewer some of those approaches. And so that's always really exciting to me to talk to someone who not only has dealt with these problems, but got to that level of detail of like refining their solution and really looking for the best answer possible. A completely different candidate profile, and one that doesn't require you to be as experienced as that, is what I'd call the curious problem solver. So anybody can say like, okay, the precision of the model was this value, but it takes another level of curiosity to say, well, we looked at the confusion matrix and we still saw we were getting 10 cases or 150,000 cases, whatever your sample size is, of people who are being mispredicted. Like we looked into why is the model not performing for those people? Can we refine the data that we're putting into the model to get a better model that takes that precision and goes to the next level with it? Anybody who does that next level of iteration stands out to me and is really important, because even if they're a junior hire, I might be managing them or mentoring them. And it's helpful to know that this is a type of person who, when you hand them a problem, isn't going to be satisfied with just like, I did it, check. They're the person who's going to go to that next level and say, okay, I did it. And it wasn't as good as it could be. So then I kept looking into it, and then I did it again and again. And balancing that with timelines and stuff is also important. But that's one that I think everybody, regardless of your level, is capable of achieving. So worth taking note there. And then another candidate profile that I really love to see is this data diplomat. And that can be someone who's transitioning into data science from maybe like a business field, and they're coming from operations, or maybe like a customer service background, where they've been the receiver of data tools before, and they know that just getting some statistics isn't overly helpful. They want to understand, how are you actually measuring impact for that business unit? How do we know these tools are going into the hands of our stakeholders and being used? And they speak at that level, and they're great to set loose in an organization, because they can harness, again, for some of these positions people are hiring where you need to build momentum and really get an audience for your product. That type of hire is a really great person to have. Okay, myth number 4, complicated things are impressive. I do not agree with this at all. I think what people expect when they submit complicated answers is like this first picture where it's just this organized, like really impressive set of tools that have been stitched together. And the reality of what that feels like when you're an interviewer going through, like I said, hundreds of these submitted practice assignments, it just becomes like a bird nest of, often people are time rushed when they're submitting answers and it doesn't come together in a way that makes any sense, or it's like hard to parse, things aren't commented well. So I'd say really try to aim for elegance. Good engineers don't add complexity unless it's needed, and data science should be the same way. You don't just do a deep learning model because it's the hip and trendy thing to do. Like, you have to pick it because it solves the problem at hand in the way that's the best for the situation and the context. Highlighting a couple of things that might add complexity that are actually great to consider though in your submissions are performance. So things like looking at the memory footprint that a solution holds and how quick the runtime is. If you can optimize things like that with a slightly more complex method, that might be a really good thing to show. Another thing is maintainability. So I'd argue actually that simplifies your solution usually. Adding things like doc strings often gives a signal that this potential hire has worked with production code before, or just generally cares that other people understand what they wrote and have coded. So that's a great thing. And then scalability of your solution. So yeah, sometimes that can also complicate the way that you write things. Like, it might not just be that you're submitting a Jupyter notebook of code that, when you click cell by cell, it runs and it outputs a solution. It might be that you split it up actually into a Python package, and that can look a bit more complex because it's not just visually in front of you, but showing that you know how to scale something and put it, probably no interview is going to require you to submit something in like a Dockerized form. But if you can take the code and put it in a format that makes it easily deployed to something like Docker Kubernetes, again, that is something that we would be excited about. Okay, and this came up actually in the chat earlier, I think during George's presentation. So talking about portfolios and do you need to have one, and is it helpful? So again, my advice here is, well, let me just go into it. The first thing is that Andrew Ng posted this on Twitter the other week, and he talked about how data science competition platforms like Kaggle are really great because they start getting people into the modeling and algorithm part of AI systems. But what Kaggle and other curated content leave out is this process of data munging that takes up like at least 60% of a data person, especially at a small company or like a startup's time. And so his pitch was that maybe we need to do some data competitions where people are thinking more about the cleanliness of their code. And so this is tangential to how I feel about portfolios. And I'll just walk you through two examples of portfolios I've seen that were very demonstrative to me of how I think about the value of someone showing me a portfolio. So in this first one, a candidate sent this my way and said, hey, look, I have a data analysis, a couple examples of that on my website for you to look through. And this was like, it was a good portfolio. There's nothing wrong with it per se, but it doesn't stand out to me or like add any value, because you can see in this first, I circled that he said, this is a recently completed take-home exercise for an interview, which is already what I was going to ask him to do. So it doesn't, it's just another thing he's doing. There's none of that data cleaning or like really deep problem solving that Andrew Ng is talking about that's so valuable to see. It's just a canned example of a data project that would never be something that I ask the candidate to do in the day-to-day. And again, it's probably a fine interview. It's just that I was already going to do that. So this doesn't add a lot for the candidate. On the other hand, here's an example of a portfolio that someone had on their website when they applied. And this is just such a valuable resource to pass to an interviewer, because this person, what stands out to me is they're not doing this for the sake of interviewing. This person on their resume was very interested in front-end development, and they came from a background of being a front-end developer. And they were so interested in the math behind that and how you apply it to rendering games in the front end. So they had this portfolio that was just amazing because the level of execution you can't see when you click into one of these games. It was really fun to play. They're like 90s style retro, but really complex math that he's applying in each of these scenarios. So what stands out so much is not only level of execution here, that the candidate is there's a level of pushing himself that's evident, of not that it always has to be in your spare time, but that growth mindset of like, I want to learn things, I want to push myself, I'm okay being uncomfortable, is something that thrives in a startup. So that's really great signal. And then the other part of it, it just got me really excited to meet him because he's obviously a guy who has some interests. He wasn't just doing this for the sake of interviews, he was doing it because he thought it was cool. And that's always fun to work with someone like that. Okay, so number 6 here, a wrong answer means that you are not getting a job offer. Again, I can't speak for all people interviewing, but I'd argue that most people who are good interviewers look for signal and not just for like a binary right or wrong. The other part of this is that usually, like I know on my team, we're always hiring for different levels. And so even though you get an answer wrong, it might be that we still want you on the team. We think there's a lot of value you could deliver. It might just indicate something about what level we would make an offer at. So again, think a lot more about sending signal to the team of who you are and who you represent as a candidate, and less about just like this test of, get everything right all the time. And so I want to walk through a couple of instances where either I have experienced in interviews, or I know would be very likely based on having spoken to like, I wouldn't say hundreds yet, but I've interviewed at least, I'd say more than 50 people at this point in my life. So, okay, let's see. Let's say you stumbled while you're solving a problem. That's an opportunity that you can show the interviewer that you know how to learn on the job and recover from it. So there's of course always going to be times when you're sitting at your desk coding and you kind of get stuck or you make a mistake, but how do you respond to that? That's something that a team should know and is nothing to be embarrassed about. It happens to everyone. Let's say you are having trouble understanding the question, and that's definitely happened to me in interviews where someone's speaking and I'm nervous, or I just do not understand what they're talking about. Take that as a great opportunity to communicate, or to show that you're able to communicate with people regardless of backgrounds, intellectual backgrounds. Like, I'm coming from a computer science role. Can I talk to someone who speaks more at a business level jargon thing? So going to the next point here, if you're feeling nervous, actually, you don't usually feel nervous unless you want the job. So you can use that as an opportunity to talk to the team about how excited you are for this role and why you think you're a good fit and what problems they're solving that you'd like to be a part of. And then let's say you're maybe standing at a whiteboard, because that still happens, but let's say you're unsure just where to start. Again, that's something that on the job you can always expect to happen. You get assigned some really complex problem and you have no idea how to break it down at first. Use that again as a starting point for showing them that you know how to get your foot in the door with a problem and start breaking it down and just thinking out loud. It's not easy, but it's a good opportunity to practice that. Okay, myth number 7. If you don't get an offer, you weren't good enough. This one, I can 100% guarantee, having sat on the other side of the table, that there are so many good candidates that we talk to that are fantastic engineers or, whatever background they're coming from. They're really impressive. It's just that we need a very specific person, and we only have a certain number of spots that we can give away. And so a quote that I'm kind of paraphrasing here from this great book that probably some of you have read, called Radical Candor, is that not everybody is right for everything, but everyone's right for something. And if you just don't necessarily have the full picture as the person interviewing, as to what this role is and what the team needs and what they're struggling with. So don't take it to heart if you don't land the job. It can just be that it's not the right role for you, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just find the next thing. There's always something new, or a different way to get yourself into this industry if that's what you're looking for. Okay, myth 8. Only interview when you need a job. This one, again, it's extra work, like interviewing on top of your current position, but it reduces the stress level so much if you can interview while already employed by someone else. So that's one part of it. The other part that I'm borrowing from a book called No Rules Rules that the founder of Netflix wrote alongside Erin Boehmer, who's a researcher, forget where from, but anyway, she does some great research on culture within organizations. They talk about at Netflix how they actually ask hires to consistently interview, because the whole idea of capitalism is that we are our own agents basically, and if a job isn't right or we don't think we're being compensated fairly, it's up to us to make the argument that we should be compensated more, or find a position where we think we are being compensated fairly. So that's a way you can do it, is just by interviewing at different positions and getting the offers. You can actually have an understanding of where you fall in the market. And if you want to make more money or jump into a role with more responsibilities, taking those interviews and talking to teams helps you understand where you're falling short, or need to grow, and you can do that in your current job as well. The other part of this is always having a story of, your career isn't just something that exists on paper. It's who you are, and it's what your life is. And so practicing that narrative and having a quick elevator pitch of what you're trying to accomplish and what gets you excited, who you like working with, is a really valuable thing to just have in your back pocket. And interviews help you to say that out loud and kind of craft it and tweak it as appropriate. And yeah, so I just want to highlight that as the final parting thought here, that interviewing is a skill for sure, and you will get rejected. We all get rejected. Don't take it to heart. Part of it, again, like Silicon Valley and startups really have embraced this idea of a growth mindset. If you're weak on something, it's not that you were born weak and you'll never get better. It's just a signal that you need to improve and practice that and find a way to get better in that area. So yeah, just practice and reach out to like grow your network, and make sure you have the right people you're talking to and people to accompany you on the journey, basically. So yeah, I also just want to blatantly advertise positions that we're trying to hire for at our company. Like I said, it's a grueling process trying to get a team together. So we'd love for anybody who's interested to apply, and feel free to reach out to me, like I said, on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk, and even if it's not related to Carta Jobs, I have gone through this myself, and hopefully have some ideas that I can share that might be helpful. So the last part here, we just wanted to do a bit of a discussion amongst the presenters about interviewing, since again, all of us have gone through this before. And so yeah, I see Kendall's there. David, Priya's there. Let's see, David, cool. Yeah, so the first question is, what's something you do now that you didn't do when you were first interviewing? And I'm happy to start out on that one, and then we can go from there. So something I've done is, when I create models on the job, or anytime I'm building a product, I make sure that I am always aware of the metrics that imply impact. So again, it's something people say on your resume, you should always be able to quantify the impact you've had. If you haven't done that while you're working there throughout, you won't have that for your resume. So it's valuable to the company. It is job security to some extent. Like if you're creating hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions even, who knows, of revenue, like they want to know and you should want to know. So just make sure you have your finger on those metrics. Okay, and maybe Kendall, do you want to jump in next?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so one thing I do when I interview now is I create a spreadsheet. So I list the company and any other attributes I'm interested in, like location, how close to, how long the commute is. And then if I get more information like the offer, I can also put in the spreadsheet and it helps to compare. And then the other thing I do is I put inside how do I contact the company? So I kind of treat it like a CRM, like I list the email and name of people I contact. So I try to, if it's a company I'm really interested in, I'll try like 2 or 3 different ways to contact them to get the interview.
Yeah, that's great. How about Micheline? Do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Erin. So I have just like a couple things I know I do differently now. One is really like for the software engineer side of things, like write really clean, crisp code with comments, and sort of talk through what I'm writing. So it's like really clear, take my time, you know, and not to be afraid to ask clarifying questions as I go along. Some interviews are actually kind of like pair programming interviews, which is super fun. It happens more than you would think, I think, from like colleagues of mine telling me about how they interview folks. The other thing is just to know, it's a mindset thing, like to know that the interviewer and the recruiter both want me to succeed, right? Like everyone wants me to succeed, and it's, you know, it's a mindset, and it really helped me have like be more relaxed and be more positive and productive in my interviewing. So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I love that. There's such a mindset to it. And like you said, knowing that everybody's on your side, like they'd love to be done with the hunting process, and they'd love also, it's just nice to like sit in the room when someone nails something. So it's a great point. How about George, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess that's related to Erin mentioned already, which is looking for a cultural fit, not just for like technology, pure technology stack that the company is using. Specifically, during the interview process, at big companies, there's not a lot of, there's usually not a lot of opportunity to actually talk to your future team, especially if there's pooled hiring. But if there's such an opportunity, it's better to have a at least quick conversation with the your potential future manager and teammates. And that's what I try to do now to make sure that there's more cultural fit. I'm aligned with the team, agree with their like principles and values, because long term, that I think that matters more to the success compared to just technologies. Because technologies, it can be learned, but there should be a cultural match, and that's what I'm looking for. And I used not to do it before.
Yeah, 100%. Like culture, if it can change, it takes forever. So it's good to make sure you're aligned up front. Okay, let's see. Priya, do you wanna go next, and then we'll do David?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
So one thing which I do now, and I did not do when I was being interviewed before, was to focus on communication a lot more than the technical part. I was mostly putting my hands on and like trying to get technical and like getting every corner covered with the technical aspect of it. But I kind of struggled initially to communicate my results in a way that a non-technical audience can really understand that. And it took me some time, because when I started working at Microsoft, there were a lot of like presentations which I did, they were not as well received, or I got this feedback from my colleagues that it's good to have a great analysis, but if it's not understandable by our audience, then it's not as great. So I really started working on the communication of my technical knowledge, because I think that's very, very important. Second thing I do is like to organize my time better. I try to prioritize things in a way that I don't just get looped into one thing, and like so much of on my plate is never really being covered. So I did not organize my time better before, and I'm still learning. I think everybody is learning, because there's already like you're always mostly overwhelmed with a number of tasks. So these are the two things which I think make me a little less stressed at my job.
Yeah, love it, love it. I actually forgot to mention that earlier, but yeah, your point about making sure that people understand what you're talking about. It does sound like in this group, maybe we have more people trying to get into data science, but I've sat in so many interviews where like, not so many actually, it's maybe like 5 to 10%, but if they lose me in the process of explaining, it's a problem, because I can actually follow like statistics talk. And so many people across the company are going to be too embarrassed to ask a question. So making sure that everybody's following what you're saying and really, is engaged in the conversation is a great, yeah, it's another like seniority thing of people learn to do that over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add to it, because people coming from different diversities, they don't have their first language as English. So they struggle a little bit in that sense, but it gets better over time. And I just feel like you just have to work on that communication part. Take some time from your technical and like hands-on to spend some time on communication.
Love it. Yeah. Okay, David.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So I guess a couple of things as well when I that have changed since I was first interviewing. One is during the interview process, I'll try to engage the interviewer. So especially things like trying to clarify the question, maybe rephrasing the question helps me to kind of understand, especially if it's a more challenging one, what they're asking, making sure I understand what they're asking. And it's a way to also kind of slow down from just instantly going, okay, I know what they want, and just diving into it and maybe going down a rabbit hole where you're really not answering what they want. So it really helps to kind of reframe it, kind of settle down, really understand what they're asking, and coming up with an intelligent response. Yeah, another thing that I've been doing as well is when I'm interviewing is keeping track of the questions that I've been asked, especially ones that I was stuck on. So if there's question they asked me and I just didn't get it, noting it down and then creating like a document, a Google Doc or something, these questions, and then going back and reviewing them helps me to kind of solidify areas where I'm not as confident or don't know and need to study more to help it for future interviews to be that much more prepared.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because it's like the process of learning. Again, it's a process sometimes.
Right,
your first
exactly.
point, I also listened to this podcast with Amy Poehler, who I'm in love with, but it was so funny. She was talking about, I forget which director, I'm not a movie buff, but some very well-respected director. She was saying when she was on SNL that she was so used to, like, if someone asked a question, she needed a response immediately, because she was more on the junior side when she first joined. She didn't quite feel like she'd earned her spot yet. So it was just like total discomfort with like a pause of any sort. And she said she met this director on set and someone asked a question and was like, he was like, that's a good question, I'll have to think about that, and walked away. And she's like, wow. And I always thought that was a sign of weakness, but actually it's a sign of his maturity, that he knows that's a hard question and doesn't feel pressure to immediately answer because he needs to take some time. So I thought, man, so relevant in a technical context too.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and now second question here. If people, let's see, can I get back to where I was? There we go. Just, we can do this more free form, but if anybody has resources that they would recommend people following, I know for me, like the data engineering podcast is one. We talked about Data Skeptic, but I listen to that quite often. It's like just nerdy enough to be really fun. So, but yeah, respond at will.
Yeah, I like not a podcast, but I like following the batch from deeplearning.ai. It's a newsletter from Andrew Ng's company. Helps me keep up to date. Other than that, Hacker News, but that's more like general, but it also has a lot of interesting data science articles.
I really like Analytics Vidya blog because I find it very complex concepts explained in a simplified language. So I really recommend that blog. I'm pretty sure people must be already reading it, but it's a good blog.
Yeah, no, cool question. I would have to say that there's a podcast called from O'Reilly called I believe it's the O'Reilly Data Podcast. Ben Lorica is the host, and usually he has like folks that have written like really great like stats and ML books, and interviews them. So like the guests are just amazing. I learn about like a new book that came out that I can like go buy, or like other resources like through that. And then on Twitter and LinkedIn, I follow a few people that I think are really good at sharing resources. So Brandon Rohr is someone on Twitter and LinkedIn. He has like beginner courses for data science. He shares like how to get started. He shares interview advice, all of the time. So he's like, yeah, he's like amazing. So that's kind of for me what I do.
One interesting resource that I found, yeah, it's a little more advanced, but it's a YouTube channel called 2-Minute Papers, and it's just a great way, especially if you're interested in more like things like AI or just what's happening in cutting edge right now. So it's a great resource just to see some some interesting papers that have come out and just a quick summary about them. So something I would recommend checking out if you're interested in that area.
Yeah, thank you, David. And to build on top of that, I once in a while just go and search on Google Scholar papers, and they will usually take you to the magazine, the website of the scientific journal. And there will be a lot of papers, and of course, we don't have time to read them all, but they're usually two sections. One is most citable, the other one is most downloadable. If you click on those, you'll see that actually those papers are not that recent, and in some areas, you could have like 3, 4 most downloadable papers published in 5 years. And I usually go and read them. It sometimes takes a few days to read them, but the value that I see in those papers that it's not just the novelty that each paper brings, but also they have prior art mentioned there. And as I read the paper, I may not know a lot of prior knowledge, and I go and research deeper into these areas, and I end up learning not just the innovation that invention that was described in that paper, but also the chain like knowledge that is attached to this paper. And it's not in the beginning, it may be a little bit challenging, but as you go and explore deeper and deeper, actually you can streamline that process. It's not as complex as it may be, but at the same time, you feel that you are like on the forefront of the humankind's like knowledge, discoverable knowledge, which is pretty interesting and cool.
Yeah, George likes to hang out on the cutting edge there. Okay, cool. So with that, I'd say if anybody has questions, we can take another 10 minutes. Yeah, Ashish. Do you want to unmute yourself or ask in the chat? Unless you unmute yourself, I guess. Through chat. Okay, can you please? Oh, interesting.
Hi, can you
There
hear
we
me?
go. Yep.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for the talk. I have a couple of questions. So I'll start with the first one. I mean, I'm sure that most of the audience here are looking to get into data science. My question is more on the aspect of like, if a person is experienced software engineer and he or she has gained some data science machine learning skills recently through a master's degree or through online resources. So my questions here is, what are the expectations for that particular individual when he or she goes to the interview, and what kind of roles they can actually look for when they're applying for jobs? Because for entering into data science is different, and for an experienced software professional, the roles might be, that they should target should be different.
Yeah, can you say one more time what's the background and then the recent addition?
I mean, I'm talking in general about somebody who is an experienced software professional, like say example 10 years, and he and she maybe did a master's in data science, machine learning, or did some online resources, and now want to switch their careers into machine learning. So what kind of roles they can target if they're not able to find anything in their own company where they're working and they want to switch careers?
Yeah, for sure. There's in Sheryl Sandberg's like Lean In book, she talks about your career isn't a ladder, actually it's a jungle gym. And that stuck with me because it just feels so true, especially being in data science, where there's a million paths to get to the same point. And so anybody can chime in for this, but my experience is that what you need to do is focus less. I mean, if you can just if you know what role you want, you can just nail it up front, like more power to you. But often you have to like kind of trace a path to that point. And so if they're coming from a software engineering background, that's very, very valuable, because I have to say, I've seen data science as quite a wild west, where there's a lot of people with statistics and that kind of background, but they don't, or coming from analytics, but they don't know how to deploy code, and they don't know things like unit testing or just like DevOps security practices. So getting a machine learning model into production ends up being this just huge leap for them, because they have no background in what it would take. Anyway, so I would I know at Carta, when we interview and someone has a software engineering background, that's a huge plus, because it means they probably have some of those fundamental deploy skill sets. I would say if they're comfortable with it, like pitching that and looking for the roles that are like machine learning engineer or data engineer or deploy engineer, anything that's like a highlight on engineering with like you sit more on a data team, you can start transitioning your way into data science if that's what you want. But you have to be able to like sell your value, and the software engineering is a really easy way to do that.
Okay, I mean, just to follow up on that, so when you interview people who are experienced for say they apply for a machine learning role, so I mean from interviewee standpoint, how should I prepare? Like for example, I have experience and then I'm transitioning myself. So, and now in the field of machine learning, it is really progressing very fast. There are a lot of different areas where there's a state of art. And so as an interviewee, getting core principles, core fundamentals strong, I understand it is good, but do we also need to make sure that we are also up to date with the state of art? Like, for example, if I want to get into computer vision, do I need to know, okay, fine, what is happening in self-supervised learning, so that I can at least tell the interviewer that, okay, fine, I'm also keeping myself up to date. So, I mean, that's where I feel a lot of people get kind of confused, like what to do. Shall we just focus on the core principles, or also try to, get some state-of-the-art experience as well through projects or?
Yeah. I think you really have to think about what role you're applying for, because like I have a friend who's working, he was working for Nest and it got acquired by Google, and he does a lot of computer vision, and he's working with very specific state-of-the-art models and deep learning and all that, because the problem he's trying to solve is so specific. And so that is very different than like what I was doing in Uganda, where you did not need to know deep learning. Like it was just a matter of a chaotic situation and giving them structure. So again, like I'd say data science is moving fast, and it isn't. Like you have people who are using state of the art. If that's what you want, you're going to have to know the state of the art tooling to keep up. There's just no getting around that. But if you're okay, if what you care about is doing like machine learning and creating impact, there are so many companies that just need, they don't need super, super fancy tools. They need you to be able to get it in people's hands. And that, again, is a very different role. When I was saying like the interview is two ways, you need to understand what position you're interviewing for.
Okay, cool. One last question I have is, among the job posting that you mentioned in your current company, there was something called product data scientist. Can you please share some insights, like what kind of role is that? Like, is it like a more like a product manager, data science, and what kind of expectations and what kind of roles and responsibilities does it come with?
Yeah, I'll generalize a bit. So again, data science has changed, like it's changed so much since I even graduated grad school, which was just a couple years ago, really. And so the titling and naming has also changed a lot. Like some companies hire data scientists who are actually more data analysts, or like there's research scientist, which means something different. Machine learning engineer. There's a million different words floating around for different combinations of the same skill sets. And so for us, like a product data scientist is a lot of product analytics, where it's doing like dashboards and visualizations and metric building and data munging for teams at the company. It's like a heavily cross-functional interfacing type of role. But there's also a lot of opportunity to do data science work that is, prepping data for models and then eventually building a model. Probably less of a focus of getting that model into production. That's not necessarily, it's not like an engineering skill set we're looking for, but having some level of rigor is expected. And so that's why I keep emphasizing, when you're interviewing, don't just think that like, oh, every data science role is the same, because they're very different. And that's probably true with other engineering departments as well, but I know for sure in data science and in this field, you need to grill the team a little and make sure you understand what you're expected to deliver.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, let's see. So we have a lot of the data science ML engineer jobs have at least some requirements for scalable distributed cloud-based experiences. What's your suggestion for someone with applied data and machine learning science experience, but no or very limited experience in big data or scalable solutions? Yeah, again, anybody else can weigh in here, because this is my opinion, but I would say I think it's really hard to get the experience of scaling products on your own, like outside of an organization. And I think that's why those roles are so highly compensated. It's something that you learn on the job and are have to be kind of focused on. And so when I was talking about your career being a jungle gym, the way I think about that, and part of what I'm doing at Carta, honestly, I didn't have as much experience with the scale, but I'm very, very interested in it. And so I put myself on a team that is looking to do that, and then just started taking on tasks that would grow my experience in that way. And so, yeah, there might be other ways to approach it, but I would say having that bigger vision for your career and looking for positions that grow you in the direction you want to grow. Like you can probably land a position on a data team. Maybe it's not the position of wanting that level of scaling knowledge, but get yourself in a seat that sits next to someone who knows how to do that, and then just kind of tell them that's what you want to learn. I have so many friends in data science who have pretty much written their own job titles at a company because there's something they wanted to learn. The company wanted them to learn it, and so they learned it, and then they were like, okay, can my title now become this, because that's kind of what I do anyway. And then boom, you've like landed yourself a new type of role. yeah, and there's ways like also some of these, for sure you can take like grad school courses or course learning of any sort. It's just sometimes if you're looking at that level of scale, it's hard to get the data and it can be expensive to actually stand up systems at that level, but you can probably learn fundamentals from master's courses or Udemy or Coursera as well. But okay. Do you have any advice as to landing interviews for people who are changing careers? For example, I've been an adjunct instructor for community college and lower division university math CS courses, but I've always had an interest in working in data science. Given that my focus has always been on my pedagogy, I do not have a portfolio, but I am currently enrolled in an online machine learning certification program. What else might help me get my foot in the door? I think what Kendall was talking about here is really important, of networking, and not in a superficial, like, oh, use people, but genuinely trying to meet people who have experience that that you're interested in. So, like this meetup is a great spot, or just finding avenues into the conversations where people are talking about this, and then reaching out to them and trying to see what's open. Sometimes, like I will say, there's so many candidates who before applying to a role are reaching out to me and saying like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I'm interested, this is my background. I know it's harder when you're just getting started because you have less on the table, but yeah, just I'd say like finding those roles where, for example, when I was coming out of grad school, I had a master's in data science, but I didn't have experience yet. And I talked to this company. I thought what they were doing was fascinating. And I told them like, I would love to work on the problems you're solving. Like, probably did myself a disservice and was like, I don't care if I get paid, which is, everybody now tells you do not do that. But I did. And so, I got my foot in the door, and then I got a couple of like 6 months of experience working for them. And that was plenty to get me the next role. And so it's just like, you build your resume. There's also like, I worked with the COVID tracking project this year, and that's just a group of people who are trying to hold our government accountable for getting the numbers right. So that's an open source project. It had a heavy data component. Anybody could contribute. And let me tell you, there was a huge network there of people afterwards being like, you were so amazing to work with. Like, do you want to work for my company? We got somebody working for Carta now who I met through that. So like, do not undervalue the power of networks, but like very genuine networks with mutual interest. I am starting data science with a BS. Will I need an MS or a PhD if I want to advance in the field, or is work experience enough? Personally, I think, if you have that growth mindset and you're getting experience together and you're working on projects that create value and you're rigorous in your approaches and you're learning in your own time, like I wouldn't discriminate against someone for not having a master's or PhD. I don't think, but there are companies where like they will not hire a data scientist without a PhD because they need that experience. And so yeah, if you have like a dream job that requires that might change my answer, but I would say with the proper growth mindset, you don't need to dish the money out. Cool. Okay, well, it looks like that's what we've got for now. So I will stop sharing. And again, if anybody wants to look me up on LinkedIn, I'm Erin Boehmer. So feel free to, like I said, I like talking about this stuff. So you can ask me all the questions you want.